Great. Yeah. I'll briefly say I'm really glad that you all are able to hear David speak. I mean, he's done this before. He's a great resource. He's helped so many of our students. So I'm glad that you all are taking advantage of this. So David, thank you.
You're very welcome. And thanks everybody for attending. My name is David Ware, and I do this periodically for Owen. I'm also going to be presenting a seminar for students, just students in the general population, probably in April. So if you're interested in that, you can certainly attend that as well. The International Student Office is coordinating that. I have about 39 years experience as an immigration attorney. Haven't ever done anything else, so this is all I know. We handle only immigration to the US, not to other countries. I have focused during my entire career on higher education, folks coming out of higher ed, folks working in higher ed. So I'm pretty well versed in the area of students and exchange visitors. So we're going to talk today about everything that happens after OPT. We're not going to get too much into permanent residence because there's not time to do that today. So I'm going to focus really on the immediate steps after OPT, that is the work visa that you want to try to get and the types of work visas that are available to you. Okay, so let's get started. So this presentation today is general information. It's not going to give you advice on your particular case. If you want advice on your particular matter that you're interested in, send me an email or call our office and set up an appointment. If you do send me an email, I'm very happy to answer simple questions. It may not seem like a simple question from your point of view, but it may be very, very simple from our point of view. A lot of people contact me and say, I'd like to set up a consultation with you to talk about TPS. Well, what are your questions? Well, I have 2 questions, okay, and I answer them in 2 minutes. On the other hand, what may seem to you like a simple question is very complicated. How do I apply for permanent residence in the US? Well, that's an hour-long discussion. So shoot me an email. If I can answer it quickly, I will. If not, I'll ask you to set up a consultation. Okay. Very important. I see this mistake happening all the time with students. They get bad advice, and they start down a road which is really bad. And by the time they get to me, they've committed errors that I can't fix. Okay, so really, really important that you not try to get your immigration advice from friends or relatives. They're either going to tell you something about a past experience that was 10 years ago, or something that happened to a cousin, or something ridiculous like that. Or they're going to simply say, well, this is what the government should do. And what the government should do is generally what the government does not do. Okay, so the field of immigration really doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make logical sense. Really important that you never talk to a non-attorney for immigration advice except someone in the international office or in the Owen. What do you call your office, Brooke?
Our office is the Career Management Center, and there's the International Student Scholar Services Office is the other.
Right. You get good advice from Brooke and his colleagues, and good advice from the international office, Julie Wilbers and her colleagues, but don't get any immigration advice from any other non-attorney. It's really important. And the main reason for this is non-attorneys have nothing to lose in taking your money and ripping you off. They don't have a license to lose. It's very hard for consumer protection folks to prosecute them, or law enforcement to prosecute them. They can close up shop and disappear with your money, and that's it. And that has happened very many times in my practice. Always consult an attorney, because the attorney that you consult has a license, can lose his or her license if they give you bad advice, or they do something bad in your case, or don't do anything in your case and take your money. And an attorney, the last thing an attorney wants is to lose their license, because their whole livelihood goes down the drain if that happens. So only get advice from your international office or a qualified, experienced immigration attorney. These days, immigration attorneys focus very, very tightly on a particular area in many cases. So you need to make sure that the immigration attorney that you're talking to has experience and knowledge about the questions that you're asking. For example, if you're getting married to a US citizen, make sure the attorney has knowledge about marriage cases. If you're employed by a company and you want a work visa or you want a green card, make sure the attorney has knowledge about that. And there are other focused areas too, like asylum, deportation cases. If you get into one of those situations, make sure the attorney has that type of experience. If not, go back to Brooke, ask for other references, external references, and he will provide them. And if anything I say today contradicts what the international office has told you, follow the advice of your international office, because they know your history, they know your situation much better than I will. Okay, so there are 5, if you want to stay in the United States, there are kind of 5 basic steps that I advise people to follow. First of all, get a degree in a field in demand in the US. And you've got an amazing resource here in Brooke and his colleagues. Use that resource. Brooke's office provides both career counseling and career coaching. That means career counseling means helping you get into a major that will be in demand in the US job market and that will be useful for you in the US job market. And career coaching is things like helping you with resume writing and interview skills. Really, really important that you utilize Brooke's services as much as possible. And that's what they're there for. Because if you end up with the degree that is not in demand in the US, you may have a hard time marketing yourself to employers once you graduate. And that's sudden death. If you can't get a job in the US, then your whole reason for being here, kind of ends or is difficult. Don't miss out on OPT, including STEM if you're eligible. I understand that almost everybody on this call probably is eligible for STEM. Note that there are new zip codes. Let me just read you a few. They're very exciting for folks in business. Economics and computer science, mathematical economics, data science, data analytics, business analytics, data visualization, financial analytics, data analytics, industrial and org psych, and social sciences, research methodology, and quantitative methods. Some of these may not be applicable to Owen, obviously, but they're all very exciting for us because, we're always looking to get someone into a zip code field because that gives them 3 years of OPT. And during that 3 years of OPT, oftentimes, even if they're not selected in the H-1B lottery that we're going to talk about in a second, oftentimes it's possible to do their green card during that 3-year period. Note that if you do not have a STEM zip code at present on your I-20, it is up to the school to change that zip code if your field becomes a STEM field based on Department of Education coding. So it's really not up to you to get the zip code that you want. It's up to the school to decide whether your major fits within a particular zip code. And also note that you can, your zip code on your I-20 can be changed. The school can issue a new I-20 all the way up to the time that you apply for STEM OPT extension. And this is really useful if if your major becomes a STEM field based on the Department of Education codes and the school decides that it definitely fits within that zip code, then they can issue you a new I-20 and you will thereby become eligible for the STEM extension. So that's really, really helpful, but as soon as you get off this presentation, don't go and harass Brooke and say, hey, can my I-20 be changed? Probably not. And the school will let you know if so. Next step, number 3, is get a good job with a good company. And people, I did a presentation the other day for another school and people sent in the chat box, what is Dun & Bradstreet? What is Dun & Bradstreet? Well, I'm sure you're all business students and you know exactly what Dun & Bradstreet is, right? Everybody that knows what Dun & Bradstreet is, raise your hand. Yes, Alekia? Are you telling me you don't know what Dun & Bradstreet is?
I've read it on Reddit. Somebody was asking if it's a good company to work at. I'm guessing it's a financial company.
No, you're close, but not quite on the mark. It is a company, okay? What they do is they rate other companies. They assess other companies, different aspects of other companies. So it's a rating service. And there are many private companies out there like Dun & Bradstreet that rate companies. But the reason why I recommend Dun & Bradstreet, they're probably the best known rating service. So you go to their site and they'll tell you give you lots of information about particular companies. Now, if you're looking to work for a company that's a household name, Google, Microsoft, Deloitte, you don't really need Dun & Bradstreet's help. But if you're looking at companies and you don't recognize them from the news or from any other source, then you really want to look in Dun & Bradstreet and see, if the company even has a Dun & Bradstreet listing. Some don't even have one, so that's not a good sign. And the Career Services Office can help you with this, help you work on this issue, because they know a lot about companies and have a lot of links with different companies. So one important thing before you accept a job with a particular company, one really important thing that you need to ask about in the interview is their sponsorship policies with regard to work visas and also with regard to green cards. If they don't sponsor for work visas and/or green cards, then you want to look elsewhere. You want to go to another company, because obviously if your intent is to stay long-term in the US, you're going to need something beyond your OPT, and that something is a work visa and/or a green card. So you definitely want to find out about their policies. As I'm sure Brooke will tell you, you don't want to go into, unless you have an ultra hot skill set, you don't want to go into an interview demanding things. You want to go in humbly asking. And so you don't want to go in and say, I demand that you do my green card within 1 year of hire. That's not a good approach in an interview. You want to say, hey, how long do you make people wait to sponsor them for the green card? And do you sponsor for the H-1B, and do you sponsor immediately for the H-1B? Are you going to put my name in the registration if I'm hired? Just very, humble, gentle questions, not demands. Okay, question number 4, get your work visa. So as you know, Alekia, are you from India by any chance?
Yes.
Okay, so if you are not Indian and not Chinese, it may be possible to do a green card if you have eligibility for STEM within, as I said before, within the 3 years of your STEM extension. But most people are going to have to get a work visa, because most employers will not start your green card right away so that it can be completed within 3 years. And a lot of people are from India and China. And the reason why folks from India and China can't do their green cards within the 3 years of STEM is because they are on a very lengthy wait list. For example, Indians have to wait about 8 to 10 years to get their green cards. So obviously it's not possible for them to just hang out in the US without any work authorization. So generally most people, even though it is theoretically possible to do green cards for non-Indians and non-Chinese during the 3 years of STEM, most people really will need this work visa. And usually that's going to be an H-1B visa. And we'll talk about the alternatives for work visas in a minute. So now we have what we call a registration process for H-1Bs, and that occurs in March of every year. So it's up to you, it's incumbent on you to make sure if you're hired by an employer and they're going to file for your H-1B, it's incumbent on you to make sure they're putting your name in the registration every year, because as we'll talk about in a minute, your chances of getting a visa in the lottery are not extremely high. And a lot of people, we've had clients that have not been chosen over 3 years of their STEM. So you need to put your name in every year. Then once you get your work visa, you basically need to convince the company that you're indispensable, that you're a really hard worker. And in most cases, in our experience, most companies will sponsor you for the green card. If they're not going to sponsor you for the green card, they'll let you know fairly soon, and you can go to another company. But most companies will definitely sponsor for the green card. Okay, so the work visa you want is the H-1B. That's the one that's appropriate for almost all people graduating from higher ed in the United States. The H-1B is for what we call specialty occupations. Specialty occupations are those that the industry standard is a degree to enter into the field, a particular degree in a particular field. Okay, so for example, accountant, obviously the industry standard is a bachelor's degree in accounting to enter that field. On the other hand, chef, there is no industry standard for a degree for chefs. So chef is not a specialty occupation, but accounting is. Okay. And another useful tip before you go to your interview is find out who sponsors for the H-1B, who, what employers sponsor folks for H-1Bs. And the URL I've got listed down there is one of many, which will tell you, which will collate public Department of Labor data to tell you who is sponsoring for H-1B. So you can sift that data by employer name, by number of persons sponsored for H-1B, by salary, by location, by job title, and so on. So it's really, really helpful to look at that before you go into an interview. Okay, so there are three basic requirements for the H-1B, and I call these the three-legged stool. As you know, if you pull one leg out of a three-legged stool, it will fall over right away. So if you don't have one of these, if any of these is missing, you won't get the H-1B. So first of all, you have to have at least a bachelor's degree or higher in a particular field. Secondly, the job has to require that same degree field or a very, very similar degree field. For example, if you have a bachelor's degree in computer information systems, if the job requires, a degree in computer science or something similar, then you're okay. But if you have a job, if you have a degree in engineering and you're going into an IT position, that may be a little bit difficult because the job has to require the same degree, more or less the same degree, or very similar degree as to what you have. And that's a constant rub with immigration. We're constantly working on that issue and massaging that issue in our H-1B petitions. So it's something there is a solution for, but it has to be carefully handled by an immigration attorney. And third, the employer is willing to pay you what we call the required wage, and they're also willing to pay all filing and attorney's fees. And sometimes with smaller companies, this is where you fall down. You've got the appropriate degree, the employer the job requires the degree according to industry standards, and but the employer says, hey, sorry, but we're not willing to pay all that money to hire you. We're really sorry. So you have to look elsewhere. That's why it's really important when you go into that interview to ask the employer, do you sponsor for the H-1B? You don't really have to, most employers, big employers particularly, know that they have to pay for everything. So you don't really have to ask that question. Okay. So what are the H-1B musts? So you're limited to the employer who petitions for you. You can have more than one H-1B employer at the same time. H-1Bs can be part-time, not a problem. You're limited to 6 years of H-1B status with all employers, unless employment-based permanent residence has begun before the end of your 5th year. So it's really important, if you're thinking about permanent residence with a particular employer and you're on an H-1B, to start the discussion with that employer about permanent residence by the end of your 4th year. Very, very important to do that, because if you hit the end of your 5th year and you haven't started the green card process, you're kind of in a world of trouble. Okay. We do handle cases like that. We put them on ultra high speed, handling, but they're difficult. They're quite difficult, and it can result in being without work authorization for several months. So that's not a good thing. Not a good thing for you or your employer. Your employer for the H-1B, your employment has to be directly related to a degree that you have. And interestingly, this can be your current degree program that you're finishing, or if you just finished, or a prior degree, even a prior degree from your home country. Okay. So let's say you have an undergrad degree in engineering and you're getting an MBA. If you're offered a job as a project manager for an engineering company, then your H-1B relates to both of your degree programs, but it probably relates more to your engineering program. Not a problem. as long as a degree that you have is required by the position. One important thing to know about H-1B workers is they're allowed to have dual intent. You know, as an F student or a J exchange visitor, those are single intent visas. You're never allowed to move toward permanent residence in most cases and continue to utilize the visa fully including visa renewal and travel, international travel. But the H-1B, on the other hand, is dual intent. That is, you can start the permanent residence process and be very far along in the permanent residence process and still get visa renewals outside the US, travel in and out internationally without a problem, all those things. So it's very important. That's a really important benefit. If you lose your job suddenly, it is possible to get a 60-day grace period between jobs. This is not intended generally for people that quit their job without any cause. So if you just quit because you want to watch television for a month, that's probably not going to get you the grace period. The grace period is discretionary with USCIS. And there's a limited number of H-1Bs each year. We call this a quota, and that means there's a lottery every year. Quota means limited number, okay? So the lottery is the main drawback to the H-1B category, unfortunately. So there are more employers' obligations in the H-1B process that you have to pay some attention to. They have to agree to employ you as they file the paperwork with the government. In other words, if they say they're going to pay you $60,000 a year, they have to pay you $60,000 a year. If they say they're going to employ you in Nashville, Tennessee, they have to employ you in Nashville. They can't suddenly move you to another city. Immigration will always look at whether there's a rational relationship between the size and the nature of the business and the job offered. In other words, if your employer files a petition for you and that employer is a 4-employee convenience store and they say they want to hire you as a management consultant or a marketing specialist, that is probably not going to pass muster with immigration because they're going to look at the size and the nature of the business, and they're going to say a 4-employee convenience store does not need a marketing analyst, okay? But on the other hand, if it's a chain of convenience stores, then obviously, yes, they would need a marketing analyst. So size and nature of the business, job offered, all that has to make sense, basic sense to immigration. I already mentioned that they have to employ you only in the geographic locations set out in the petition package, the labor condition application. So if they say you're going to be working in Nashville, you got to work in Nashville. If they want to transfer you to another city, they got to file new paperwork with the government. And they have to agree to pay you the so-called required wage. And we're going to see what that is now. So the employer has to pay the higher of the actual or prevailing wage. The actual wage is an average of wages paid to similarly employed people at the actual work site, at the same work site. The prevailing wage is a weighted mean or median wages for similar positions in the geographic area of employment, usually within 100 miles of the work site. So basically, without doing a lot of complicated math, you just need to know that a competitive wage must be offered, okay? And to figure out what the prevailing wage is, you can look on a site called the flcdatacenter.com. And I'm going to show you what that site shows you in just a second. I'm going to show you a screenshot from that site. You want to make sure when you're offered a job that the employer is willing to pay you at least the prevailing wage, the level 1 prevailing wage. And here you go. So this is what we call the All Industries database. This is for all private employers outside of higher education generally. And this little screenshot is for Houston, the Woodlands. And it's for software developers applications. Not many of you on the call would be in that category, but you might. And you have to look here, is your employer offering at least about $76,000 a year if you're going to be working in Houston? Now, obviously, these wages differ depending on where you're going to be working. If this were San Francisco, for example, the wages would be much higher, right? So you have to, if you're looking at flcdatacenter.com, You have to specify first the database, which is all industries. You next specify the state, and then you specify the county or parish where you're going to be working. And then you go in and look for a job title that you think, or a job description that is similar to what you're going to be doing. So really fairly easy to use. It's pretty intuitive, and it does give you a good indication as to what the minimum offer from a particular employer might be. Now, big companies like Google, Microsoft, people like that, they pay really nice wages. So you usually don't have to worry about this, but your small and medium-sized companies, some of them may even ask you, hey, what's the minimum wage that I have to pay according to the Department of Labor? And you might have to look it up. Okay, so that's wages. So there's some more obligations of the employer that they have to make sure you're satisfied. First of all, they have to, if they terminate you during the term of your H-1B petition, if you're involuntarily separated for any reason, layoff, termination, company goes out of business, whatever it might be, they have to offer to pay your return transportation to your country of nationality. This is really important. If they don't do this, they can get in big trouble with the Department of Labor. They have to notify other workers of the terms of your job, including your salary. And this is done via 2 10-day postings or a letter to a union if your position is unionized. And they have to pay, as I said before, they have to pay all attorney's fees and all USCIS fees. This is one of the 3 legs of the 3-legged stool that is vital. If they don't agree to pay the attorney's fees, if you hire an attorney to do this, don't agree to pay USCIS fees, then you can't get the H-1B. So what are the government fees that they have to pay? First of all, there's a regular filing fee of $460. There's an anti-fraud fee that everybody has to pay of $500. There's something called the acquia fee. If it's a larger company with 26 or more full-time employees, that's $1,500. If it's a smaller company with 25 or fewer employees, that's $750. If you have dependents filing with you, that's an additional fee of $370. If you want 15-day processing of your H-1B petition, and most of the time this is not necessary, but sometimes it is, that's $2,500. Now, attorney's fees are where you get in the weeds. There are no standard attorney's fees for an H-1B. These vary widely. You can find self-help sites on the internet that will apparently help you through the H-1B process and have an attorney review the final package. I would definitely not go there. I think there's some as low as $299. Then on the other hand, you'll find big law firms charging hourly rates for H-1Bs. And if you do an H-1B on an hourly basis, that can really go through the roof. It can be a lot of money, sometimes up to $10,000. So if you're tasked with finding an attorney, if they don't have an attorney that does their H-1Bs, shop around a lot, and I would land on fees. As far as fees go, land somewhere in the middle. I would ask, when you shop around, ask what the attorney's fees are. Okay, who pays for what? As I said, the employer has to pay all attorney's fees and all filing fees. This is made very clear through a long series of judicial decisions. Basically, the concept is if the fees or costs are imposed on the employee, that means that his salary or her salary is being reduced, and the Labor Department does not want that to happen. Big liabilities can be incurred if the employer refuses to pay these fees. And if they don't want to pay, have them talk to an immigration attorney, and the attorney will explain to them that, they either pay a few $1,000s now, or they might pay $1 million or several million in the future. Employees have been fined over $3 million for pushing these fees onto employees. So it's not something that an employer wants to do. And note that the employer is not responsible for the premium fee if that's for your own personal reasons. Let's say you're going home for a wedding or something and you want your H-1B approved right away, and they're not responsible for any fees or costs relating to your dependents. Okay, so how does the H-1B lottery work? I mentioned that there's a lottery every year for H-1Bs. How does it work? Well, because there's a very limited number of H-1Bs given out each year, we're going to talk in a minute about that, 78,200. Every year since 2012, there's been a lottery. And immigration in last 2 years has set up a registration system, which really helps, I think, is very helpful. So the registration this year is going to be March 1st to March 18th. And basically what the employer has to do, they have to register their company, and then they put your name in the lottery. They put all employees' names in the lottery that they want considered in the lottery. Note, I've gotten a couple of inquiries this year. Hey, can more than one employer put my name in the lottery? Well, that makes no sense. Okay. If you're working on OPT for employer A, why would employer B want to put your name in the lottery? Immigration is very suspicious of this and generally considers this fraud. So it's not something you want to get involved in. You want only one employer to put your name in the lottery. Now, if you have some, like I said, if you have some super red hot skill set and several employees are competing for you, and legitimately more than one employee wants to hire you, then this is okay. But that would be a very rare situation, okay? Very rare. Generally, this is a fraud scheme that floats around the international student community every year. Some people get sucked into it. Please don't. Why would you want more than one employer to file for you? Because obviously it would increase your chances of getting chosen in the lottery. But usually the other employers, other than the one you're working for, that want to file for you are fake employers. They really have no intention of hiring you. That's why it's considered fraud by immigration. Okay, so your name goes into the registration system. A few weeks later, immigration will inform your employer which employees have been selected, okay? Then immigration will give the employer a 60-day period to file their complete petition package, because the registration is just some basic personal information about you. It's not any forms or anything like that. It's really just basic information. So in order to complete the petitioning process within 60 days, they have to file a big petition packet, and we'll talk about what's included in that packet in just a minute. Interestingly, this selection that occurs in March is not the only, it's not the only selection that occurs. Last year, we had 2 additional selections. The year before, we had 1 additional selection. So it's very interesting. They find what happens is immigration determines that they don't have enough employers following through on the petitioning process to fill the entire quota of 78,200. So they have to select more folks. Okay. And so that's why that happens. So, don't get your hopes way up about being selected in a secondary selection, but it definitely does happen. So if the H-1B is approved, note that you will not get H-1B status until October 1st. And we're going to talk about, for a minute, we're going to talk about CAP OPT. So I'm going to take a really minimal break here for 5 seconds. All right, I'm back. So, the lottery, we're going to talk about that in just a sec. Let's see, there we go. So if you're selected in the lottery, if your name is selected in the registration process, what does the employer have to file within 60 days? Well, it's a complicated application. It's got a lot of pieces that have to be put together. The first piece is something called the labor condition application. This is filed electronically with the U.S. Department of Labor. It takes about 7 business days to be approved. If your employer has never filed an H-1B or hasn't filed many at all or hadn't filed one in a long time, the Department of Labor may go through something called employer. They have to may verify the existence of your employer, existence verification, which can take a while. Once the LCA is approved, then the H-1B petition gets put together. That includes the original approved LCA, evidence of your qualifications, some information about the employer, information about the job, and that all goes off to a USCIS service center. Depending on where you work, it will go to either Vermont or California, and also depending on what type of job you're in, it might go to one of those service centers. You can't determine what service center your case goes to. It just goes to the one that's appropriate for your location and the type of job you're in. So it's not something you can decide or choose, or your employer can choose. If you're maintaining lawful status in the U.S. when your H-1B is filed, generally your status is going to be changed to H-1B along with your family members. Your family members will achieve what we call a dependent status, H-4 status, and that is your spouse and minor unmarried children. If you're currently in J exchange visitor status, or you have been in the past, you may have issues changing your status. If you have ever been a J in your lifetime, or your spouse has ever been a J, you need to bring that to the attention of the immigration attorney immediately when they start processing your H-1B, because it really can cause huge problems down the line. If you're outside the United States or you're traveling immediately following your change of status, you're going to have to get an H-1B at a U.S. consulate. As you probably know, during COVID, about 40% of consular officers were laid off. For a while, Mr. Trump had instituted travel bans, and you had to get a special exception to get an H-1B. That's all pretty much gone yet now, but there is still difficulty getting appointments. So if you're going for an H-1B appointment, make sure that you carefully check the consular webpage where you're headed, and you make sure that you can get an appointment quickly. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to Brittany on our call today. And why is that, Brittany? Because Canadians do not have to have visas. You guys can travel just with your H-1B approval notice.
Sorry, David, and I am Mexican. Would that also apply for me?
No. Lo siento mucho, pero a los mexicanos no le damos ese beneficio. So Canadians travel visa free. Mexicans have to have a visa.
It's the traveling visa. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So the one thing that does apply to Mexico, which you see at the bottom of the screen, is if you're going, anyone is going, unless you're from a country that's a state sponsor of terrorism. There are very few of those: Cuba, North Korea, and a couple more. Unless you're a citizen of one of those countries, if you're going to Mexico or Canada for less than 30 days, you can come back without a valid visa stamp in your passport, okay, which is pretty cool. You can go to Playa del Carmen for the weekend, have fun, and come back without a valid visa stamp. So that's really good. So what I was mentioning about Canada, Patricio, is that Canadians don't have to have a visa. The only time Canadians have to have a visa is if they're an investor in the United States, they have an investor visa, or they're a fiance. Pretty much beyond that, Canadians can travel without a visa, which is great from our point of view, because it relieves Canadians of a lot of the hassle of, especially during COVID, of getting visa appointments and getting visas abroad. So, but thank you for letting me know you're Mexican, because now I have 2 special people on this call, Brittany and Patricio, that I can talk in particular about when we talk about TN visas. Okay, so finally you get your H approval, and that generally can take up to 7 months. If you pay for the premium processing, your employer pays for premium processing, you get 15-day processing, as I said before. And just a reminder again, H-1B status does not take effect until October 1st of the year in which your employer files for you. Once you're approved for H-1B and October 1st has passed, you may move to a new employer. You cannot, absolutely cannot. This is another scheme that I see among students a lot, every year. You absolutely cannot move to a new employer prior to October 1st. If you're approved for an H-1B for employer A, you cannot move to employer B prior to October 1st. It's very simple. If you do that, you will lose your place in the lottery. You absolutely positively will lose your place. If October 1st has passed and you have passed at least one payroll period, you have at least one paycheck from employer A, then yes, you can move to employer B. You can do what we call porting, which means that employer B has to file an H-1B petition for you. And immediately upon that filing, you can move to employer B. And porting is very difficult if you start out on your H-1B in higher ed or another quota exempt employer and you want to move to private industry, you want to move to a private employer that is subject to the quota. That's a very difficult proposition, okay? If you have not been counted against the quota and you want to move into a quota subject position. So if that becomes your situation, it's tough. Okay, so let's go back and talk about the quota now. So how many H visas are made available each year? I've talked about that momentarily before, about 78,200, approximately 58,200 for those with no U.S. earned master's degree, and exactly 20,000 for those with a U.S. earned master's degree or higher. The reason why this is an odd number is because 6,800 visas are set aside for citizens of Chile and Singapore. We did free trade agreements with those countries a few years ago, and Congress decided that would be a good idea. So those visas called H-1B ones, we're going to talk about those in a minute. Those are available all year. They're not subject to a lottery. Going back to the master's, non-master's quotas, note that just having a U.S. earned master's, or you will have a U.S. earned master's by the time your petition is filed, is enough to get you into the master's quota. Your position does not have to require a master's degree. Just having the master's, the bare fact of having the master's, or the fact that you will have it by the time your H-1B petition is filed, that's all that's required to get you into the master's quota. Now, if you're in the master's quota, you're considered twice in the lottery. You're considered, your name is first run through the regular quota, the non-master's quota, then your name is run through the master's quota. So it really increases your chances of getting selected in the lottery if you have a U.S. earned master's, or you will have a U.S. earned master's by the time your H-1B petition is filed. Okay, so definitely, I think all of you are getting a master's degree. That's really great and important, and it will strongly increase your chances of winning, getting selected in the lottery. Okay. So as I said before, since 2012, since 2013, actually, we've had a lottery for H-1Bs. Here are the very depressing statistics. Last year, you can see 2021, we had about 275,000 petitions received and 3 lotteries, okay? So as you all know basic math because you're all in fairly analytical majors. The higher number of petitions received means the lower chance of getting selected in the lottery. There's 78,200 slots available. If 275,000 petitions are filed, then your chances of getting selected are fairly low. Generally, we tell people if you don't have a U.S. earned master's degree, your chance is less than 50%. If you do have a U.S. earned master's degree, your chances are somewhere maybe 60, 70%. And that's borne out by our CAP filings every year. It's really important, your employer is not going to go out of business if your name's not put in the lottery or you don't get the H visa. So it's really important for you to stay on top of the H cycles, the registration cycles every March, and make sure that your employer or your employer's attorney has gotten your name into the registration system and has filed your petition. Okay, who's exempt from the quota? All right, so generally, if you're going into a for-profit entity, you're going to be subject to the quota. That's a general rule. There are a couple of little tiny exceptions we're going to talk about in a minute. But if you're going into a for-profit entity, generally you're going to be counted against the quota. One exception is folks already counted against the quota within the past 6 years. So let's say you originally came to the U.S. on an H-1B. You decided, hey, I'm going to get an MBA at Owen. That will help my career chances. You change your status to F1. You get your MBA, you want to go back to H-1B. No problem. You were counted against the quota when you came in originally, and you won't be counted again. So that's great. You should put that somewhere very prominently on your CV, because that's a very, very valuable thing for employers. They know that you're not going to go through the lottery. Folks who work in higher education, that is colleges and universities that offer at least an associate's degree, are not subject to the quota. Folks that work in nonprofit research and government research organizations are not subject to the quota. And note here that I have emphasized research in both of those. Most government entities and most nonprofits are not subject to the quota. Not exempt from the quota. So for example, the city of Nashville, not exempt from the quota. They're a government entity, but they're not a government research entity. They don't have research as one of their central functions. Another example would be United Way or Goodwill. Both are nonprofits, both do very valuable work in our society, but they're not nonprofit research organizations. They don't have research as one of their main aims, so they are subject to the quota. The next exemption is nonprofits that have a written affiliation with an institution of higher education. So for example, if Goodwill has a written agreement with Vanderbilt to train counseling students or to train students who are involved with people with disabilities, that would be fine. And that way Goodwill would get a quota exemption by being affiliated with Vanderbilt with a written affiliation agreement. The most common place you see this is K through 12 school systems. Most K through 12 public and private K through 12 school systems have a written affiliation with an institution of higher education, usually to train student teachers. So they're exempt from the quota. Then the last two exemptions down at the bottom are rather obscure, but I want to describe them just so you'll know. Probably very few people on this call would qualify for one of these. Folks who work at rather than for a quota exempt employer. That is, they work on the physical premises of the employer. A good example of this would be dining services or the bookstore at Vanderbilt. It's possible or probable that one of those is run by a private contractor, which would normally be subject to the quota. But if you're hired, say, for a management position for one of those companies and you're going to be working on the Vanderbilt campus, then that would be a quota exempt position. So you're working for a quota subject employer, that is, say, Sodexo or Aramark, the dining service, but you're working on the Vanderbilt campus and you're carrying out a function which is central to the university, that is feeding students. Okay, the final quota exemption is even more obscure, but I got to mention it because it exists and I want you guys to be fully informed. And that is if you're engaged in concurrent quota exempt, quota subject employment. The example I like to use is, say, Dr. Smith. So none of you are in doctoral programs that I know of, but let's just assume for the moment that you're a postdoc for Dr. Smith and you're working for Dr. Smith on the Vanderbilt campus. You're on an H-1B for Dr. Smith as a postdoc. And Dr. Smith gets all excited because he's developed a medical device which he wants to commercialize. And he wants to do that through his private company. And he says, hey, you're my postdoc. You know the most about this device as anybody. I would like to hire you for my for-profit company off campus. So the way that happens is the gentleman who's a postdoc is working on a quota exempt H-1B for Vanderbilt. Dr. Smith offers him a private position off campus. As long as he continues to work at least part-time for Vanderbilt, Dr. Smith can file an H-1B petition for him, and those two petitions, neither one is subject to the quota. So pretty obscure, but definitely something you need to know. Okay, CAP-GAP OPT. Let's talk about this for just a second. The international office can talk to you about OPT all day. They have workshops, I think, once a month. How often, Brooke? Like once a month for OPT. They'll talk to you all day about your first 12 months, your STEM extension, CAP-GAP, et cetera. But I just want to briefly mention CAP-GAP because it does relate squarely to your H-1B process. So this is the deal with CAP-GAP. This was created in 2008 to help students stay in the US who have been sponsored for the H-1B process. If your employer files a quota subject petition with a start date of October 1st, and that petition is filed before the end of your OPT, and this is not just registration, this is the full petition packet, has to be filed before the end of your OPT. You get this full CAP-GAP benefit, which means that your F1 status is extended through midnight of September 30th, and your OPT is extended as well through midnight of September 30th. Okay, if the H-1B petition is filed during your grace period after your expiration of your OPT, you know, you get a 60-day status grace period after your OPT expires, then you get a half a loaf or half a benefit. You get to stay in the US, but you can't work until October 1st. To get documentation of the CAP-GAP, you have to go to back to your school, and they'll issue you a CAP-GAP I-20. And that CAP-GAP I-20 will show that you have permission to continue your OPT through midnight of September 30th. You can't travel while you're in CAP-GAP because you have no physical EAD card. You'll just have an I-20, and the immigration regulations require a physical EAD card for travel. So you're sort of stuck in the US for about 6 months. Generally, it's very difficult to get an H-1B through your own business. I would not even try it. It is theoretically possible, but immigration hates these. So don't try to file for yourself as an H-1B. There are a couple of workarounds if you're not chosen in the H-1B lottery and your OPT is ending. The most common and popular of these is called Day 1 CPT. You have to enroll in a new course of study, and certain schools and certain disciplines allow you to continue working for your employer through curricular practical training. Okay. Big caveat with this. There are a lot of shady and sketchy Day 1 CPT programs around the country. There are a couple of reputable ones that we refer people all the time. Harrisburg University in Pennsylvania, Ottawa University in Ohio, both have very good programs with, you know, academic oversight, academic deliverables, and so on. So those are two that you could try if you're running out of OPT and you were not selected as an H-1B. Two other alternatives, trainee visas. There's an H-3 trainee visa and a J-1 trainee visa. These might be appropriate if you're just starting out in a particular field. The employer has to have a very organized training program to make these work. Finally, down at the bottom, a really good workaround for employers who have international operations. They could transfer you abroad for 1 year and then bring you back as what we call an L1 transferee. The good thing about the L1 visa is that your spouse can work if you have a spouse. So that works often as a workaround. What are the H-1B alternatives? Well, we have a Mexican and a Canadian on the line, so we want to talk a little bit about the treaty NAFTA TN visas. Of course, the treaty is no longer called NAFTA, but the visa continues to be called TN. As you know, the H-1B visa category is governed by a general concept. Does the position fit with what immigration considers to be specialty occupations? In the NAFTA context, you're looking at a list of occupations, and your job offer in the US has to fit somewhere on that list. And I was talking to Patricio, I was talking to Brittany a little bit about this before the session started. The only real category for folks with MBAs or related degrees usually is going to be management consultant. However, if you're in a more focused curriculum like finance or maybe data analytics or something like that, there might be some other category for you, but generally management consultant is going to be your go-to if you're in business. And this is a little bit tricky, difficult category for TNs. So you definitely need to have an attorney working on this if you decide to go for a TN. More alternatives, the H-1B one for citizens of Chile and Singapore. This is available all year, as I said before. And by the way, going back to the TN, You just have to be a citizen of Canada or Mexico. You can't be a permanent resident. Doesn't matter where you came from originally. If you're now a citizen of Canada or Mexico, you qualify. Same thing goes for citizens of Chile or Singapore. It doesn't matter if you immigrated from another country. If you're currently a citizen of Chile or Singapore, that's all that matters. There's also a visa, which is very similar to the H-1B for Australians. This is called an E3. And then finally, there is a J1 exchange visitor category, which has lots of different subcategories, which might qualify you for a work visa. Most of these relate to higher ed, but some of them don't. As I said before, the J1 trainee is popular for folks who don't get selected in the H-1B lottery. Also, K through 12 teachers are often sponsored as J1s. Next up, we have the person, O1, person of extraordinary ability or achievement. This is tough for most recent graduates, unless you have had a career in your home country and you were, well regarded in that career. It's going to be tough if you're a recent graduate to qualify for an O1. It requires lots of evidence of your achievements. E1, E2, if your country of nationality has a treaty trader or treaty investor visa with the U.S., you can invest as little as $50,000 in an active business, which employs a couple of local workers, and this can mean a visa for life. Also, if you're hired by a company with your same nationality, let's say if you're Canadian and if you're hired by Bombardier, or if you're Mexican and you're hired by, let's say, the folks who make Corona beer, I can't remember the parent company's name.
Yeah.
What is that? What's the name of it?
It could be Modelo or Modelo is part of Constellation
Right.
brands. Yeah.
Right. So if you're hired by a company that has your same nationality, they can hire you as an essential employee and put you on an E2 or an E1 investor or trader visa. If you're curious as to what countries are covered by these treaties other than Canada or Mexico, which are obviously both covered, you can look at this URL here and it'll give you a list of all the countries that are covered. And note that the E visa can also be an H-1B workaround. If you're not selected in the H-1B lottery, you can be sponsored by a company for an E, assuming that company has your same nationality. We talked a little bit about the L1 visa, transfer visa, as a workaround. It also can be a primary source of employment. If you were employed by a multinational company abroad for at least a year before you came to the US and they wish to re-employ you in the US, that is possible. You don't have to go abroad for a year and come back if you were employed by that same company for 1 year prior to coming to the US. Okay. What if you don't get a job offer in the US? Well, it may mean that your skills are not appropriate to our job market. You may need to go back, talk to Brooke again, or talk to the career counselors, his colleagues, go back to school, retool your skills to fit more into our economy. So for example, if you have a general MBA and you have a hard time finding a job when you get out of school, you might want to go back to school and get a data analytics degree or something more focused on in an analytical way. Canada, Australia, and other countries have easy immigration or easier immigration systems, I should say, than the US. Canada has something called express entry, which is really helpful. It's really fast if you're sponsored by an employer. There's also an independent immigration system to Canada. You can get, if you achieve a certain number of points in a scoring system, you may be able to immigrate. I've got the name of a Canadian immigration lawyer up there that you're welcome to contact. Also, you may find that certain companies want to transfer you back home because your cultural or language skills are in demand. One prominent company that does this exclusively when they hire in the US is Johnson & Johnson. Okay, let's talk really quickly about the routes to permanent residence. I'm going to give you a 5-minute primer on permanent residence, and then we'll take your questions. So employment-based permanent residence is probably how you're going to go about it. A few people who are exceptional or extraordinary can self-sponsor, but that's not very common. Generally, you have to be sponsored by an employer. Family-based immigration, you can be sponsored by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident spouse. You can be sponsored by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident parent. If you have a child born in the U.S., once that child reaches 21, that child can sponsor you. You can be sponsored by a U.S. citizen sibling. Be aware, however, that a lot of these categories, these family categories, have long waiting lists. For example, if you're from Mexico, you're being sponsored by a U.S. citizen brother or sister, that can take over 20 years, up to 30 years, in fact. Next up is asylum. If you fear persecution in your home country because of race, religion, national origin, social group, or political opinion, you can apply for asylum in the U.S. It's a complicated application. Don't do it by yourself. Get an attorney. If you invest $500,000 to $1 million in the U.S., you can get a green card. If you can show that you create 10 full-time jobs here. If you've been the victim of domestic abuse, human trafficking, or a serious crime committed in the U.S., you can possibly get a green card. If you're sponsored by a congressperson or senator, you can get a green card, but this is very, very rare. It's called a private bill. This is done only in extreme humanitarian situations. If the government decides that you do not belong in the U.S. and they put you in what we call removal proceedings, sometimes the immigration judge can stop your case and give you a green card, but it's pretty rare these days. And if you come from a low immigration country, and sorry, Canada, sorry, Mexico, neither one of you qualifies as a low immigration country. I don't know where are you from, Lam? You speak up? Lam, are you there? Are you multitasking?
Oh, I'm born in the U.S. I'm just here because I work with Brooke.
Oh, you're a U.S. citizen. Okay, all right.
Graduate.
Never mind. Okay, so visa lottery, here's the folks who are disqualified. You can see there up top, Canada, and down below, Mexico. So, all right, now I am pretty much finished with my presentation, and I'm happy to take your questions. There's my little bio. You'll get to read that later when Brooke provides you with the slide deck. So Brittany and Patricio, hit me with your questions.
Brittany and Patricio, as you're warming up, I'll mention one of our current second years did the diversity lottery and got it. We've had students do that in the past. So just a reminder, Manuel is the person who got that. So
Okay,
just a reminder to pursue that. Don't forget it.
Where was he from?
He's from Spain.
Okay.
He said he's been applying for a couple of years, but we had another student a few years ago who actually watched your presentation, applied, and got it a year or two after graduating.
Great, wonderful. So Zen, you are new to the presentation. We're just about finished. We're taking questions now. So hopefully you have some good questions for me. Patricio, you've got your mic open. Do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, first of all, David. It's really helpful. I had some questions regarding, like, it's probably in the future, but I actually do have a kid that was born here in the US. When you say that he could ask for sponsor me for a green card when he's 21, does that mean that I have to be living in the US for 21 years, or in 21 years, like I could be back in Mexico? And
yeah, you can be back in Mexico. You can't just live in the US for 21 years. If you live here for 21 years, you will disqualify yourself from a green card.
Okay,
unless you have a valid status during that time. Now, that having been said, it is possible to keep a TN for 21 years. You can keep renewing your TN in 3-year increments for 21 years, no problem. So if that were your situation, if you had a lawful status for those 21 years, you could be in the US the entire time. But if not, you'd have to go back to Mexico.
sorry.
How old is your child now? How old is your child?
Like 2 months, 10 weeks.
Oh, boy, you've got a retirement insurance policy there.
Yeah.
Retire in Florida. It's nice. It's sunny.
And
So
when
anyway,
it comes to the TN, you said that managing consultant was basically the simplest way to go.
Yeah.
Me, for example, in my specific case, that I will be interviewing for an internshiping in an investment banking position, and probably hoping to get a full-time offer. Would investment bank have something towards that could help me with a TN visa status?
They're going to have a good attorney team, good immigration attorney team, probably, to help you with your TN, and that you should be able to get it if they know what they're doing.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. If you don't get selected, I would go for the, Patricio, I would go for the H-1B first. If you don't get selected in the lottery, your OPT is expiring, then try for TN. Are you, is your field a STEM field?
Yeah.
Oh, good, good. So you've got 3 years of OPT. That's wonderful. So just make sure that your employer puts you in the H-1B lottery every year. Every year.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? That you obviously came on. You must have a question. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I intended to join on time, but there was some unforeseen circumstances back in my country, and I had to like make some calls and stuff. So I'm from Burma, and I'm aware that you were a Fulbrighter as well. Like 20 years ago, I am currently studying at Vanderbilt on the Fulbright scholarship program. My question is that like currently like with like what happening in Burma, and like I technically can go back because like I'm just gonna say like I became like a fugitive back in Burma because of like my actions against the coup and the military and stuff, and like so I'm just like I'm currently under J1 visa right now, and I'm obliged to go back to my country for like 2 years after the program ends to fulfill my.
Yeah, what you need to do is that the only way to get out of your, actually there are 2 ways to get out of your 2-year home residence requirement. You could apply for asylum in the United States, and that kind of gives you what I call the whole bundle of sticks. It gives you the route to permanent residence after you've been an asylee for a year. Or you could apply for what we call a persecution waiver of your 2-year home residence requirement. And that only gives you 1 stick. That gives you the waiver. You still have to work on a work visa. You still have to get a green card. So if I were you, I'd probably go for asylum. How long have you been? When was your last entry to the U.S.?
My last entry to the U.S. was 2021 July. I think it was July 13th or something like that.
Okay, so you need to hustle. It's best if you apply for asylum within 1 year of entry. You can theoretically do it further out than that, but you need to get to a good immigration lawyer and talk to them about an asylum application. Okay, there are good people in Nashville that you can talk to, but you definitely need to get with an immigration lawyer right away and hopefully file before July. That would be best.
Yeah, because my program ends in May, and another thing is like, so like my bank account was frozen in Burma as well. So like another thing is like with the fundings and stuff. And yeah, do you have like any recommended lawyer that I could talk to or something like that?
Yeah, shoot me. I don't want to advertise a lawyer on the call, but shoot me an email, and I will give you a couple of recommendations in Nashville.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ware. I'll shoot you an email.
You're very welcome. Yeah, you need somebody really locally because you're going to be called for an interview. The person will need to prepare you very carefully for the interview, go with you to the interview, and so on. So all that it's important if you have a local attorney. But if all those things if what you're saying is correct, then you should have no problem getting asylum.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Ware.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Good luck. Any other questions from folks? Brittany?
Sure. Yeah, I would just love to get your opinion because so I'm in marketing. I used to work in digital marketing, and that's what I want to go into, marketing or brand management, but I'm also doing the STEM designation for operations and analytics. And I think it's like kind of a gray area because I know a lot of marketing jobs work with analytics, and I've been told from some people it's not an issue showing like falling under the STEM category, even if it is the marketing job. Right. I was just wondering because like I have that, and then I also have the TN visa. So I'm just thinking like, say I don't get the H-1B the first round, do you think one of those is better than the other in my situation?
Well, you'll have, if you have a STEM zip code on your I-20, you will get up to 3 years of STEM OPT, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to show, to get the STEM extension, you have to show that you're working in your STEM area. So most marketing jobs these days, it's not going out and selling brushes door to door or telling people how to sell brushes door to door. You're doing a lot of analytical work, a lot of analytical work. You know, in fact, most marketing these days involves heavy analytics. So, you know, I don't think you'll have a problem getting your STEM extension and showing that you're involved in analytics. You want to tell